Hey, what's up guys, it's Unleashed here. Today we are back with another video on Sonic Frontiers. And in today's video, we don't have any news to talk about because we're going to go with an old-fashioned discussion video. And we're going to be discussing something which I feel that is a huge issue with the way Sonic Frontiers is fundamentally built. Now this issue won't really bother you on the first time playthrough of the game, more so on repeat playthroughs of it. And the reason we're going to be talking about it in today's video is because one, I've seen it going around in the community recently, and two, I want this issue to be fixed by the next game because this issue can really just plague open zone Sonic games, and obviously we don't really want that, do we? Because yeah, this open zone formula is going to be sticking around for the next 10 years at least. So yeah, without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, let's discuss the topic at hand. Alright then, I know what you're thinking. Unleash, what issue do you have with Sonic Frontiers that you think is going to be plaguing the franchise if it doesn't get fixed? Well, my friend, the issue is quite simple, and it's one word actually, which is replayability. Now, replayability is a huge factor in how a Sonic game can be enjoyed. Now, depending on what Sonic game you're actually playing, the first playthrough of it can be fun, and sometimes not so fun. But this is where repeat playthroughs of that game can come into play. As we should know, Sonic games were built to come back and replay them to get better at them and obviously improve on it. And we see this in many Sonic games, whether it be 3D or 2D, where you have a bunch of obstacles in a level that obviously, when you actually learn the level design, you can avoid them naturally, get better at the game, and obviously master it. And when you reach that level of mastery of that Sonic game, it just feels so damn good, doesn't it? Like, it does. There's no denying it. It does. When you're going for that A rank in Sonic Adventure 2 in Metal Harbor, it feels good, doesn't it? When you go and take the long way around the rocket to actually go ahead and get the A rank, obviously, just that adrenaline pumping, it feels so good. Or when you get that perfect Deathless run on Eggman and finish with that S rank 2, especially in the hot dog missions, it feels good, doesn't it? Slightly frustrating, but still, it feels good. Or when you finally get that perfect S-rank run on Lava Mountain Zone 3 from Sonic Lost World. Again, it might be frustrating as heck getting there, but when you do it, you feel an immense amount of satisfaction in your chest. You just feel it right there. And this is the sorts of things that Sonic was built upon. Replayability is one of the core elements of a Sonic game. If you don't have good replayability in your Sonic game, then you've ultimately failed in my opinion. Now, replayability doesn't really come that easily in a Sonic game. Like Sonic games where, even though you don't really get anything for replaying them because, like for example, Generations, where the game is so easy that you pretty much have the S-ranks by the time you play it for the first or second time, and that's really it. But the reason you want to keep going back to those levels is because obviously, the game is so well designed and obviously it doesn't hold your hand all the time. You have a choice of freedom in those levels. But then you have the Sonic games where they aren't really all that replayable because of the way the game's designed. A good example of this being Sonic Forces, and obviously, like we're talking about in today's video, Sonic Frontiers. In my opinion, Sonic Frontiers doesn't really have that much going for it in terms of replayability. Now, Battle Rush in particular definitely helped combat this issue. And not just because it was more content, but because Battle Rush was actually difficult. Which leads into my main problem with Sonic Frontiers. The game isn't really all that difficult. Trying to get the S-rank on 1-2 might give you the illusion that the game's actually difficult, but once you get past that, the game really isn't that difficult all the way up until probably Aranos Island. Actually, no, maybe Ria had something going for it, actually. There was a bit of difficulty in Ria, I'll give them that. But that's still a huge majority of the game with barely any difficulty. Now, there are some elements of the game which actually do have some difficulty, obviously the main one being the combat. Well, that is if you don't level up the entire game, because me personally, I like to stay on level 1 stats for the entire game and just never level up, because the game's actually a lot more fun in that regard, because it actually adds some more difficulty to it. But obviously, a lot of people are probably not going to do that. They're going to want to level up and stuff like that. And obviously, that makes Sonic stronger, which means enemies go down quicker, and that just reduces a lot of the difficulty the game could have had. Now, in Aranos Island at least, I would say that the combat does still give you a bit of trouble even if you're on max level or something like that, because that's when the enemies really start to fight back. Like, they're not just stood there taking the hits like on all the other islands. They're actually just fighting back like they should be doing. Always just fighting back, which is what you want in a combat system like this. If the enemies aren't fighting back, it just becomes mindless button mashing, just finding different combos, and then it can get a bit tiresome. And so overall, the combat isn't entirely easy, but it definitely could do with a bit more in it. But nevertheless, combat is one of the aspects of Sonic Frontiers where I'd say has a lot of replayability going for it. And to an extent, I would even say Cypress has this going for it too. Now, the reason for that being is that they are like Sonic Forces stages where they're just mostly automated and that's really it, because you actually have to do stuff in those stages. But the thing that holds both, sure, you got your stages like 1-2 and that's really it, to be honest, where they do kind of challenge you to get the S rank, but for most of it, it's just very, very easy. You could die like a couple times in a stage and still be like 30 seconds ahead of the S rank for some reason, which is just bizarre. And unfortunately, that does take away from Cyberspace's replayability a bit, but definitely not entirely. Because at the very least, the game expects you to do things in those stages, like they actually challenge you in a lot of places. And yeah, I do understand that a lot of it is just reused level design, believe me, I know. But even still, the level design, even though it's reused, still does require you to put some input in there, meaning that you have some stuff ECS ranks. But the place in Sonic Frontiers where this is definitely not the case is unfortunately the main meat of the game, the open zone. More specifically, the platforming. Sonic Frontiers consists of many little open zone challenges in terms of its platforming, where you actually have to get some memory tokens. It's kind of similar to Super Mario Odyssey if you think about it, but in Super Mario Odyssey, the power moves and stuff like that require some skill and actual thought to get to. But in Sonic Frontiers, 90% of the open zone platforming comes down to automation, homie attacking balloons, and then in my opinion the worst thing about it is that there's very, very small segments of platforming. And then when you consider how much automation is actually in those platforming sections, there is barely any substance in the platforming in the open zone, which is very worrying. And this is where the replayability issue in Sonic Frontiers comes into play. If I ask you what the biggest issue with Sonic Forces would be, what would you say? I'm guessing you most likely say short levels, terrible controls, an underwhelming story, but most of all, automation in the levels. You could have the worst controlling Sonic ever made, and have the shortest stages ever made, but even with all of that, you can still make some good designed Sonic stages, which is obviously what Sonic Forces isn't for most of the time, and then obviously the platforming in the open zone. Because the game always just takes away that control away from you so you don't actually play anything, you're just watching stuff happen, it doesn't allow for any difficulty or actual freedom in that platforming because you can't do anything. Your control's been taken away from you. Sure, it might be cool seeing it for the first time, but what about on playthrough number 10, 20, 30? For how long will it be fun just to see Sonic running along a green wall with a dash pad at the end of it, where you get to do absolutely nothing? Exactly. It's gonna get boring real quick. And unfortunately again for Sonic Frontiers, the open zone platforming is kind of the meat of the game. At its heart, a Sonic game should always be a platformer, not a beat 'em up, not a cutscene or movie, but a platformer. And if the platforming is basically non-existent and just being overshadowed by everything else in the game, like combat and whatnot, is it really that great of a Sonic game? Now before I go on any further, I just want to point out that I think that Sonic Frontiers is an 8 out of 10 game. I'm not just being a hater as some people would call me out for just because I said something negative about the game. I like the game, like a lot. I think it's better than Generations for crying out loud. But that won't solve this massive issue just plaguing the game. What if you've collected every single memory token in the islands of Sonic Frontiers? What is the point going back to the platforming again? Exactly. There's almost zero reason to actually do it. If you're going to be using the platforming, you're most likely just going to use it for rail launching. Like, be honest with me. Using it for rail launching, be honest with me here. And while that isn't necessarily a bad thing, why can't we have platforming where I like doing it because it's platforming and then also just for rail launching? Why not both? This is why Rhea Island is such a great island, because the platforming in there is actually very good. Most of the time you're actually required to actually do stuff in there. Especially in tower number 3 and 6, where a lot of the parkour climbing wall thing is actually not automated anymore. You actually have to do it yourself. And because of that, it leads to it being very replayable because there's actually stuff to master there, which can't be said for the other islands. Once you've done the platforming section of Sonic Frontiers, that's it, you're pretty much done with it. Platforming was actually really well designed and good, then I'd have no problem going back to it again. Like, why not? It's good platforming, right? I play a Sonic game for the platforming. Sure, good platforming, count me in, I'm doing it again. But that's just not present in most of Sonic Frontiers, like, at all. And then this all leads back to the replayability of Sonic Frontiers. If most of the platforming in the open zone is just automated, you're not replaying anything, you're just rewatching it over and over again. And I don't play video games, especially Sonic games, just to watch stuff happen. I play them to, hear me out here, play the game. It's why people dislike Sonic Forces so much, because the game just keeps taking away control away from you. And this issue is still present in Sonic Frontiers, and it needs to be fixed immediately. And I know that Kishimoto is definitely capable of this. I mean, he made Sonic Lost World for crying out loud. Lost World near the end of the game definitely picks up in difficulty, and that's why I just love the game, like, a substantial amount. Lost World is not afraid to challenge you, and because of that, it makes for mastering the game feel extremely satisfying. It's so good, man. And there were some little snippets of that I can see in Aranos Island with this platforming there. But the problem is that they're too short of segments. They need to be much longer, man, much longer. So please, Kishimoto, I know you know what difficulty is because you made Sonic Lost Worlds and some of around this island obviously. So I just hope they can expand on difficulty more in Frontiers 2, whatever it's going to be called. Because difficulty, in my opinion at least anyways, really helps with the replayability of a Sonic game. So if you just bring that back, boom, I'll be very happy, man, very happy. Anyways, that about does it for today's video. So yeah, that is in my opinion one of the biggest core fundamental issues of Sonic Frontiers. And if this issue isn't fixed for the next game, we're gonna start to have some problems, man. We're gonna have some big problems. But what do you guys think of this topic? Do you agree with me in this fashion or not? Let me know down below. I'd love to see what you guys have to say. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, especially that last one. Don't forget to become Unleashed by pressing that join button down below. And remember, it's not necessary. And I'll see you all next time. Peace!